Hi, I'm Diane MacEachern with Moms Clean Air Force, and I am thrilled to be here today with Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. She's a climate scientist. She's the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy, and she's the author of this fabulous book, Saving Us, a Climate Scientist Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World. I just want to make sure you see the whole cover. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Hayhoe. I won't even call you Katharine, Dr. Hayhoe.
Katharine is totally fine, and thank you. In addition to being a climate scientist, I'm also a mom. And
Fabulous.
That's a big part of why I care about climate change. I mean, as a mom, what would we not do for our children and for their future? And today, climate change is one of the biggest threats to that future.
Well, let's get started there because, everybody's talking about it, and yet we're not all talking about it in the same way, are we? And one of the things that I think is so fabulous about your book is that you really drill down on how to talk about climate change, especially to people who don't take it as seriously as we do. So let's start there. How do we talk about climate change?
Well, the interesting thing is we are not. So those of us who talk about it all the time might be like, what? What do you mean? But 14% of us, only 14% of people in the whole US talk about it regularly. And so that means, let's do the math, 86% don't. That's a lot of people who don't talk about it. So I've been curious. I've had thousands of conversations with people across the US and around the world, and most people are worried. It isn't a case of not being worried. And most people don't actually, despite what we hear in the news, most people don't reject basic physics that we've known since the 1800s. But here's the two biggest problems we have. Most people don't think it matters to them personally.
Oh, interesting.
They agree that it matters to future generations, like maybe their grandchildren. They agree it matters to plants and animals, non-human species. They agree it matters to people in poor countries, but they don't think it matters to me living here. That's the first big problem. And then the second big problem is we don't know what we can do to fix it. People tell us, well, change your light bulbs and recycle, but we know instinctively that that's not going to fix the greatest threat facing human civilization.
Right.
And then we hear people even tell us deliberately that the only solutions to climate change are to stop everything. To stop driving, stop flying, stop having children, stop eating, stop breathing, destroy the economy, basically return to the Stone Age, and then we'll fix climate change.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but if those are the only solutions to climate change, I'm not totally sure that I'm on board with them either.
So where do we go from there? We've got these people who want to do something, they don't know what to do, or we've got people who don't realize that it affects them. Where do we go? How do we talk to them?
Well, talking is the first most important thing that we can do, because
Okay.
if we never talk about it, why would people know why they care? And if they don't care, why would we ever fix it? But here's the secret. Start with the heart, not the head.
Okay.
Start with something that we both agree on. Because so many conversations about climate change these days start with either butting heads over something we don't agree on, or start with a doom-filled news story that just makes us feel completely hopeless. So start with something you agree on, and hey, if we're both moms, that's a huge thing that we can start with talking about our kids, right?
Right.
And then connect the dots to how climate change is affecting what you both care about. And this has an added advantage. Not only does it bring climate change close to home, but you're implicitly saying to the other person, and as humans, we're very good at picking up on the subtext, aren't we? You're implicitly saying, you're a good person and you care about the right things.
Right.
You're implicitly saying you're a good mom, and I'm worried about this because I'm a good mom, and clearly you're a good mom. So obviously you would be worried about this too if you knew. And it's worlds away from, unfortunately, the judgmental tone that often underlies a lot of our conversations. Like, I care about it because of this reason. And if you only were just more like me, you would care about it too. But if you're not like me, then you're not the right type of person.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but when I sort of pick up on that in a conversation, it usually doesn't make me want to change. It just makes me want to dig in my heels and say, oh yeah.
Right.
Well,
Right. We lose track of the fact that people don't have to care for the same reason as we do in order to care. But
Precisely.
one of the things that's interesting in your book is you make a lot of parallels between the conversation around coronavirus and climate change. And we see this happening where even, in the parent community, there are a lot of parents who just aren't willing to get their kids vaccinated the way they might not be willing to take climate change seriously. And that's a real challenge when you're trying to broaden the scope of people to get more people into this, this world that we're in. That's where climate change is a reality.
You're totally right. And there's so many parallels. But unfortunately, there's no vaccine for climate change.
Right.
But there is a treatment. And that's where the second half of our conversation has to come in. So begin with something you agree on, connect the dots to how climate change is affecting it. So let me give you some examples. I have a colleague who lives in Arizona. She had to wake her kids up before dark in the summer so they could go out and play outside before it was too hot and too dangerous for them. I have friends who live in Nevada. They said they couldn't let their kids outside for 3 weeks in a row because of the wildfire smoke. They didn't want them to breathe it in. Right. I have a colleague who monitors kids' health as they play in playgrounds. And it turns out that playgrounds with lots of trees and shade protect the kids. But playgrounds that are out in the burning sun, the kids can be dehydrated and even overheat. And of course, we know that as climate changes, it's getting hotter and wildfires are burning more area.
Right.
So connect the dots, but don't end the conversation there. We have to bring in positive, constructive solutions. We have to talk about what's happening in our community. And I collect good news stories about what's happening in Texas, where I live, or in Canada, where I'm from, or wherever I am, wherever I'm speaking. I look for good news stories of what schools, universities, businesses, companies, cities are doing in that place. And I share those. And without an exception, no matter who I'm talking to, even if the person is completely dismissive about climate change, which is not an ideal person to talk to, the 7%ers, as I call them, they're not the ones we can have good conversations with. But even with them, when we bring up real solutions like, hey, did you know that Texas has and this is often very, very positive topic with politically conservative people. Did you know that Texas has the biggest army base in the US and it's powered 43% by clean energy because they're saving taxpayers $150 million? Do you have a problem with saving taxpayers $150 million?
Right.
Even the most hard and dismissive will usually be like, no, I don't have a problem with that.
Right. Well, speaking of those folks, I mean, Moms Clean Air Force members are always very active on the front lines of public policy. We talk to our legislators a lot, our elected officials. We testify at public hearings. We go to community meetings. And it can be hard to talk to people on the other side of the aisle. There's this big red-blue divide going on in the country right now. And, there's a climate package trying to move through Congress, and it's getting very, very polarized. So what are your tips for communicating to the other side of the aisle, wherever it is, about exactly this kind of thing that you're talking about, sort of when you're talking to parents, getting the other side of the aisle to really embrace that climate change solutions are good for the country?
Well, climate change is the number one most politically polarized issue in the whole country. And it's been that way for over 10 years, since the Obama administration. So if we can have conversations about this, what else could we have conversations about? I think almost anything. So again, what's the secret? The secret is, if that conversation begins with something that you're already disagreeing on, it's not going to go well.
Okay.
So I often just, if it's just begun by somebody just headbutting me, metaphorically speaking, I try at least once to diffuse that. I try to find an area of common ground. But if they're not even willing to go there with me, that's not the time or the place to have the conversation with them. It just isn't. It'll actually possibly make things worse rather than better in the long run. So beginning a conversation with something we agree on, and sometimes you have to do some legwork on this. Ask them questions. Find out about what makes them tick. What are they enthusiastic about? What are they passionate about? What do they love? What are they concerned about? Get to know them first. And I tell you, I have never had a conversation with anybody if I've been able to ask them questions about their life. And in the book, I have so many examples of conversations, some of them quite funny too. But I've never had a conversation with somebody where I haven't been able to find at least one point of agreement. I mean, I'm sure there are people in this world who you can't. And if you do, that's okay. That's not the right person for you to have a conversation with. There'll be somebody else.
Right.
But Ask them about their life, about what they care about what's important to them. And you can find, if you listen long enough and hard enough, you can find something that you can connect directly to, did you know? And then offer a surprising fact to them. Do your homework, have your facts prepared. Did you know that there are, more jobs in the solar energy industry than in the coal industry? Isn't that great for our kids, for the future, for their economy? It doesn't have to be about clean energy. It could be something local. It could be something in the business that you're both in. It could be something related to the military. It could be something related to your church or a shared faith. But find concrete, practical examples of real world solutions that no matter where they fall in the political spectrum, they have to say, yeah, that actually sounds like a great idea.
Right.
Because 99.9% of the objections people have, they're not sciencey objections. I know they sometimes have sciencey window dressing on them. They are solution aversion. So doing our homework and being able to communicate clearly positive, practical solutions is the number one most important way that we can start to diffuse this divide.
What about, there are so many of us now who are putting solar collectors on our roofs and who are driving fuel efficient vehicles and, really trying to do the right thing. To what degree should we communicate to our communities the things that we are doing and the benefits that they're providing to us?
We absolutely should, because as I talk about in my book, these things are literally contagious in a good way, as opposed to COVID, which is contagious in a bad way. So they've even shown that the number one predictor of whether someone's going to get solar panels is whether there's somebody else who lives within about a mile of their house who has them. And in the book, I talk about how when I first got a plug-in car, we had to plug it outside for the first few weeks before we got a plug in the garage. Every single neighbor who up until that point had just sort of waved out, behind a closed window as they passed, every neighbor stopped their car. And if we were outside, they got out and they said, "What is that? Can I look at it? Does it have a gas pedal? Where did you buy it? How much does it cost?" And they're like, "Wow, that's really cool. I had no idea." So 100%, everything you're doing, talk about it, and talk about how much money you save, how you don't have to go to the gas station anymore during COVID. Talk about how, how it makes you energy independent. Talk about all the things that you love about what you're doing, and absolutely spread the news, because personal action is contagious. And again, the number one thing you and I and everybody can do is to use our voices to talk about it.
What's your suggestion for dealing with negative social media? I mean, probably everybody who's watching this is on Facebook, is on Instagram, maybe on Twitter, maybe on TikTok, may have a newsletter. We all use social media in one way or another, which is great. It's very powerful. On the other hand, it's probably the largest source of disinformation and misinformation about climate change. So what's your solution for how we deal with all the misinformation that social media are putting out there?
Well, you're right. It is. In fact, studies have shown that fake news travels 6 times faster on Twitter than real news. And that YouTube is pretty much single-handedly responsible for the spread of the flat earth theory. So yes, social media is a huge problem. So what do? I use social media, and I try to use it as a tool for good. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn, and actually I'm starting TikTok tomorrow.
Good for you. I haven't tackled it yet.
Well, so if anybody's on TikTok,
know how it goes.
Yes, if anybody or your kids are on TikTok, I'm actually, by the time you listen to this, I'll be on it, so you can find me there. And I'm using it to try to spread the right information. But here's the thing: there's a lot of trolls on social media.
Right.
So when someone posts false information, what I typically do is as long as they're not completely hostile, calling me horrible names. And actually, that's how the book starts out. The book literally starts out by listing some of the names that I get called on social media. I got a big kick
out of that. It was very funny. Good for you. You must have a very thick skin by now.
You have to. You have to just say, you know what? They don't know me. They're just saying that because it reflects on what they're thinking.
Well, and they might not even be a real person. I mean, it could just be a bot that's making this stuff up. So
about 20% of them are bots. Right. I actually use a bot checker, but a lot of them, unfortunately, are real people.
Yeah.
And so if someone's not completely hostile, if they haven't called me a handmaiden of the Antichrist or a whore or an idiot, all of which are things I hear quite frequently, then I will respond once. And if I see a post by somebody else, I will respond once, because on social media, there's always other people watching. And so I will respond once and I'll
Right.
say, I'm sorry, but that's not true. And I will provide a link. I don't get into arguments. I just provide a link to one of our global weirding episodes on YouTube that answers frequently asked questions, or to skepticalscience.com that has answers to 190 common objections to climate change, or sometimes just, a positive article about solutions. I'll provide a link. I'll say, I'm sorry, that's incorrect. Please update your understanding with these resources. And now 99 times out of 100, the person I'm responding to will not even be able to click because they are dismissive. A dismissive person will literally not be able to even listen to what you say,
Right.
or click on anything you provide.
Right.
So my goal on social media is not to reach them, and it's not to argue with them. But you know what? For every person I respond to, there's 10, 50, 100 people who are looking at it, and they might click on what I say. So if the person replies—
That's a very good point. Yeah,
yes,
that's a really good point. That's very strategic, actually. It's good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So keep in mind kind of the long game here. Yeah.
Right.
You're not trying to convert somebody on social media. That's never going to happen. I can't even do it. And I've tried my hardest for 10 years. What you can do is you can speak to everybody else. And you know what? 93% of us are not dismissive. And 93% of us are definitely listening.
I like what you say about here's a link and update your understanding. That's a really good way to put it, actually. Not, get your facts straight, buddy, or something, but here's accurate information, update your understanding. That's really good.
We all need to update our phones. We update our computers. We update all the time. We can update our brain too.
That's a really, really good point. What about talking about the science? I mean, some people will still say, I understand that California's on fire. I understand we've got these bad hurricanes, but I just don't get how this actually is happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we need to simplify the explanation, but have an explanation that everybody can understand, and then that'll get shared also.
Yes. And that is exactly why I created my global weirding videos on YouTube. And it's also why I helped start an organization called Science Moms. Now, okay. Science Moms is completely complementary to the Moms Clean Air Force, in my opinion. It is about 10 or 11 of us who are scientists, who are also moms, and that's why we care about climate change. And so what we do is we create and we put out on social media short explainers. How do we know hurricanes are getting stronger? How is climate change affecting wildfires? What can we do about it? Use our voice. So right. We've got all kinds of little videos, cute little, graphics. And if people just follow Science Moms on social media, you can see all of those. And I completely agree. It's important to have a short answer, but we don't want to get into arguments over raking forests or forest management and what's contributed the most to the risk. We just want to simply say, look, it's hotter and drier. Wildfires are burning greater area and the season's longer. And I care about it because have I told you about how I couldn't let my child outside for days on end because of the wildfire smoke? Right. Or how my sister had to leave her house and drive around with her kids and her belongings and her pet in the car trying to escape the wildfire. And every time they went to this place, it was almost going to burn down too. Yeah. Immediately pivot to why it matters and what we can do to fix it.
Right. Good points. One of the things that gives me hope is that we've got a lot of young people coming up behind us who, not only the Greta Thunbergs of the world that are really out there, but even people younger than her who are starting to learn about climate and take climate science more seriously, but they're not getting very much information in schools. They may not be getting accurate information. They may not be getting any information whatsoever. So what's your suggestion for how to deal with that particular issue? And again, like your group and Moms Clean Air Force, they have a tremendous amount of information on the websites about, how parents can talk to their kids about climate change. But it seems like we need to be doing that right from the beginning. Get those kids to change those light bulbs and teach those kids to recycle and get those kids on their bicycles so they're not driving everywhere. But what other things can we do to talk about it so that our kids get how important it is?
Well, in our home, for sure, we also need to look at what we eat, more plants, less red meat. We need to look at food waste. That's a huge source of emissions.
Right.
We need to just remember that when we just leave stuff plugged in, it doesn't make sense because it drains power. And we need to talk about how as a family, hey, we're going to be saving up our money, and the next car we buy, it's going to be one that you can plug into the wall, or the next big family purchase we make, it's going to be, solar panels, or the next big trip we take, we're going to be driving to a few national parks. parks instead of flying somewhere in the Caribbean, because a lot less emissions and safer these days too, to be totally honest.
Right.
Our kids are awesome. And in some states, they are getting good information. The National Science Center for Science Education released something called climate grades last year, where they graded each state on the quality of its climate change education in public schools. And some states got A's, some states got F's. And if our state got an F, if you just Google climate grades and National Center for Science Education, it'll pop right up. There are a lot of resources we can use. On the Science Moms website, we have books and documentaries and videos that you can watch with your kids. I made global weirding not just for adults, but for kids too. To sort of explain, how do we know this is real and how is it affecting us today? There's lots of sources that you can go to get good, reliable information for your kids. And to be totally honest, my son lives on YouTube, and many people's children do. And he is so up to date. Like Kyrgyzstan has great science videos, and they made some on climate change. He watched so many good programs that actually have great information on climate change. And did you know, even the Octonauts and the Wildcrats, great shows on Netflix and on PBS, they have really good information on climate change too. So you know what? We don't just have to rely on our schools. We can get it other places as well.
That's so great. You know, when we're talking about climate too, I know you're very active in your church. And when we're talking in our religious communities about it, I mean, some people see it as an issue about creation. And some people, you know, some institutions, not so much. So how do you communicate if you are a part of a religious community, whatever the religion is? You know, you've been so successful in talking in your community about it. What tips do you have for others to get this, you know, started in their own religious communities?
Yes. So first of all, just to be totally clear, it is a creation care issue. So, for example, in Judeo-Christian beliefs, in Genesis 1, chapter 1, it says God gave humans responsibility over every living thing on this planet. So it's very clear there. And that same concept of stewardship or caring for nature or creation is present in almost every other major world religion. But for some people, that's not really the focus of what they do and what they care about. So for example, I grew up in a tradition where there was, in addition to caring for nature, there was much more of a focus on caring for people. And so for me personally, what actually made me decide to become a climate scientist was when I found out that climate change was not only an environmental issue, that it was an issue that directly affected not only our health and the economy and national security, but it affected the poorest and most marginalized and most vulnerable people more than anyone. And it was profoundly unfair. They're the ones who have done the least to contribute to the problem.
Right.
The 3.5 billion poorest people in the world have contributed to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. 10%. 90 corporations have contributed 2/3 of heat trapping gas emissions since the dawn of the industrial era. 90 companies. Their CEOs could fit literally in 3 Greyhound buses. So when I found that out, that was when I decided, you know, no more astrophysics for me. I was going to do everything I could to help fix this urgent global problem because it connected directly to my core values, which are caring for and loving each other, our neighbors. And of course, that includes loving creation and our planet too, because where do we get the air we breathe? Where do we get the water we drink? What about this amazing world full of living things that surrounds us that we are responsible for? It all goes together. So figure out, again, with whatever community you're part of, what matters to them the most. Where are their priorities? What resonates with them the most? Do they run a soup kitchen? Do they care about the poor in your neighborhood, in your area? Are they big into supporting relief and development organizations? Like World Vision is really big into climate solutions because they understand how it affects people in poor countries. Are they really into, you know, picking up trash and caring for local green spaces?
Right.
Figure out what's important to your community and then connect the dots to climate impacts and climate action. On my website, which is just my name, katharineHayhoe.com, I'm asked so frequently, what can my church do, that I literally have a list of things that churches can do.
Okay.
Yes. All the way from, you know, create a green team, engage your young people and your youth, model stewardship in terms of doing an energy audit, providing places for people to lock their bikes or plug in their cars, community garden, getting rid of your styrofoam and plastic waste, reducing food waste, trying out more plant-based recipes in your potlucks and your dinners. There's so many things we can do. And within a church or within any organization, when we as an individual use our voice, we're reaching all of the people in that organization. And we're empowering them with the tools they need to then talk to others in whatever circles that they are in. And that, again, that's how it becomes contagious.
Right. That's fabulous advice. I want to touch on something you said at the beginning of our conversation, which was that we can be very judgmental. Those of us who are doing everything, we're giving up. We feel like we're giving up so much, and we're doing so much. And then you hear about people who are still flying all over the place or still driving a Hummer or whatever. How do you figure out how to deal with your own internal feelings and not be so judgmental and still keep feeling like, you accept those people for who they are, you keep doing what you do, and then you hope that you set an example that others will follow. I mean, I do think that's a quandary for a lot of activists. You just can get annoyed with people who aren't even seeming to take the most minor of steps to make a difference.
How can you not be? First of all, if you feel that way, you're not alone. Because we just look around and we think, how can people be doing this? Like, when I, as a Canadian, moved to Texas and I literally saw people tossing trash out their car window, I was so incensed that I would write down their license plate and call the don't mess with Texas hotline. So I completely understand, been there and done that myself. But here's what I've found with climate change. Even when I've talked to people who drive giant gas guzzlers, they know, and they already feel guilty about it. But they feel like maybe it's a choice that they don't have another choice because they're a farmer or they need that truck for some reason. The Ford F-150 is just now starting to roll off the assembly lines. Right. And up until now, there hasn't really been a great truck that people could buy for an affordable price. They might be somebody who that's just the job they're stuck in and they don't really know how else they could work or how, Right. So you know what? Most people already feel guilty. And I talk about that in the book. I have a whole chapter on guilt because when you already feel a bit guilty, and trust me, you have to be living under a rock these days not to have it, even if you don't admit it. They're not going to admit it, but it's there. If somebody comes along and makes you feel more guilty, you're not going to change. You're just going to dig in your heels more because they're judging you and they don't understand your life and they don't understand you already might feel a bit guilty about it, but you just don't know what to do about it. But when we approach somebody from the perspective of, hey, have you ever thought about, or could I help you? Or this is super exciting. Did you know that now there's a new electric truck coming out? It looks awesome. Have you ever seen anything about that? Or, hey, I noticed you have a Hummer. Did you know they're not even making gas guzzling, or no, not guzzling. They're not even making gas powered Hummers anymore. Now they're making electric. Have you ever thought about getting one of those? There was a great ad during the Super Bowl last year with LeBron James and the electric Hummer, and it's 1,200 horsepower. I mean, when you approach from the perspective of, hey, we're all in this together, and I understand you love whatever it is you love. Did you know? Then all of a sudden they have a chance to be a good person too. And all of us want to be a good person, but a lot of us just feel like we're sort of stuck and we can't be because of the way that the world is. So yeah. I love what my colleague Michael Mann wrote, and I quote him in my book. He said, everybody doesn't have to stop driving. We just need electric cars powered by clean energy. We don't need people to just stop eating meat all the time. We need sustainably sourced meat, which is going to be more expensive and we can't eat as much of it, but smart grazing puts carbon back in the soil. Feeding cows supplements helps reduce their methane belches. And nobody should be eating $1 burgers, but there's also Beyond Beef, which is actually quite good. We eat it ourselves. And it's about offering everybody the ability to make these changes, whether they feel convicted about it because of climate change or not. And by doing that, we have to change the system. And to change the system, we don't do it by guilting and judging people. We do it by talking about how we all need a better future.
You did something interesting just a minute ago when you were talking about the Hummer, and you said you were describing it and you said gas guzzling. I mean, gas
powered.
So
neutral word.
You correct it right. So do you have other examples of judgmental words that we use to communicate climate change that we could replace with these neutral words that just, that are more descriptive perhaps and might drive the point home a little bit better?
Well, I'm glad I made that Freudian slip because it just shows, first of all, we all still do it. But second of all, it illustrates that point. If I'm talking to somebody who's driving a Hummer, you don't want to use a derogatory term because that'll just turn them off. So I definitely would watch out for the should, or the why don't you, or the sort of the implicit, like you aren't doing the right thing and you should be doing the right thing. And the why questions that aren't really why questions.
That's
like,
a very good point.
yes.
And I do know somebody else who's on this conversation who's guilty of that.
Yep. We all are. And here's the
Yeah.
thing, we all make mistakes. And probably some of the favorite stories in my book are the ones where I have made mistakes. And you got to pick yourself up, you got to learn from it. And then every time we do this, it just gets better and better because we learn, we figure out how to connect, and we have these positive experiences that we can then share with other people. So one of my favorite stories probably in the book is one that relates to the whole how do you talk to people of faith, where I was invited to speak at a very, very, not just theologically conservative, but politically conservative Christian college. And before I was invited, I became aware that people thought that I was going to be coming, literally, to tell everybody that the only solution to climate change was abortion. And they were very pro-life, obviously.
Yeah.
So with them, I realized it wasn't about care for creation. It wasn't about stewardship. It wasn't about loving the least of these, as the Bible says, speaking to the poor and the vulnerable. For them, pro-life was their central issue. That was their biggest thing. So I said, okay, I threw out the whole presentation I was going to give, and I created a whole brand new presentation about how if we care about life from conception to death, not just conception to birth, as so much pro-life seems to be, then let's talk about how burning fossil fuels and climate change affects the unborn. It affects maternal health. It affects babies. It affects young people. It affects senior citizens. Let's talk about how climate change affects our life. And if we truly are pro-life, then we'd be out at the front of the line demanding climate action. And so it actually, I won't tell you the
How did that go over? How did it go over?
It went over very well.
Good.
Very well. But that was because I listened to what they were saying. And for me personally, that was not the main reason I care. I care, again, because it's a justice issue. That's me. And that's the top of my priority list. But if we listen carefully to what people are saying, we can figure out 9 times out of 10 how climate change connects to what they care about and what real solutions look like that they could get on board with.
You know, earlier we were talking about social media, but we still have mainstream media to deal with, right? We've got the networks, we've got cable news, we've got newspapers. Hopefully communities still have newspapers. Yeah. And those reporters and those editorial writers and those op-ed writers, they're also conduits for talking about climate change. Do you do much work with them? And do you have any suggestions for parents and others who care about climate change about how to work with sort of the mainstream media?
I do as much as I can. And although the media is doing much better now than they used to, it's sad when 2 billionaires go to space and they get more media coverage in a matter of a few days than climate change gets all year.
Good point. I completely agree.
We live in a world that just sells clickbait headlines. And it's not just about the volume. It's about the content too. Fear, anger, and frustration sell. So if you look at most of the headlines out there on climate change, they're headlines that make you feel anxious, afraid, depressed, or frustrated. And that's why it's so important to practice active hope. And in fact, the reason I wrote my book is because the number one question I've got over the last few years is, what gives you hope? Right. So that's really the question the book answers. And that hope comes from looking, not sitting there waiting for it to arrive, because it never will arrive. That's not the world we live in. Going out and looking for hope, looking for people who are making a difference, looking for positive stories. They do exist in the media. And when you find them, share them.
Good point.
Talk about them.
Yes.
And learn about what's happening in your local community. And if you have a local newspaper or a local news outlet, find out who their news director is, or find out who would be writing stories about climate risks or climate solutions. Maybe it's the broadcast meteorologist. Maybe it's somebody who does like community stories. Find out who they are and just reach out to them and say, hey, have you ever thought about talking about this or that? Or here's some cool things about our community that I would like to see new stories or new information on. The media is really always looking for things to write about. And if you reached out, not in a judgmental way, not saying, why don't you write about this? I can't believe, I'm horrified. No. Say, hey, I really enjoyed this story that you did. Start with something positive. I really enjoyed this. I particularly liked how you talked about this. I would love to see more of that. And I'm sure you would too, based on what you've written. Have you ever thought about writing about this or this or this? World of difference in those two approaches.
Right. Right.
And it's so important because it can help.
So, and activists, I think, can also write their own letters to the editor, and they can write their own op-ed pieces, and they can become active members of their own media universes in their own communities.
Exactly. All of us can be a voice for change where we are with the media. And you know what, with our elected representatives, I saw a crazy statistic the other day that I didn't know. I'm going to just plead being Canadian for my ignorance. But my ignorance was this. I did not know that I think it's 99.9% of elected officials are not federal.
Oh,
Now,
interesting.
now it could be 99.5, but I kind of think it was 99.9. So, you know, the federal ones are the Congress people, the representatives, or the senators. But most of them aren't federal. They could be state, they could be council people for your, you know, they could be on the school board. And the point of that was all politics is local politics, and climate solutions are part of politics. And so if you want to have a conversation with somebody locally, they're a lot more available than your senator or your congressperson or your representative.
Right.
You could go in. And again, what do you begin the conversation with? You don't begin the conversation with, I can't believe, or why don't you, or that was horrible. No, no, no. You do your research and you begin the conversation with, I noticed that you proposed this, or you voted for that, or you said this. I completely agree with you, or that's so great. I love that, or thank you for doing that. And then you connect the dots. Because you said this, I thought you might want to know, or I wanted to help talk with you about blah, blah, blah. And then we can have these positive conversations where we can make such a difference. And people are doing that already all over the country.
Right.
As you read the book, the image I want people to be left with after you read the book is that climate action is not a giant boulder sitting at the bottom of an impossibly steep hill with only a few hands trying desperately to push it up. That boulder is already at the top of the hill. It is already rolling down the hill in the right direction. It already has millions of hands on it. A lot of those are moms, of course. And we just need to get it going faster. And that's why we need more hands.
Great
Isn't that
analogy.
a different picture?
Yeah. Great analogy. One last question, because I know you have to go. We all get tired. You know, it's grueling work. It's inspiring. It's hopeful, as you said. It's very motivating. And yet every now and then we need a break. We just need to recharge. And I'm curious, how do you recharge when you just do all this work that you do and you talk to so many people and you write these books? What do you do to relax?
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is so important. And I think that's the way we are as moms too, right? I mean, obviously we love our children, but sometimes we need to make sure we recharge as a mother too, as well as someone who's concerned about climate change. So look for those opportunities and make those opportunities. Don't feel guilty. Our actions should not be dictated by our guilt. We are doing what we're doing out of love. That's why we're a mom. That's why we're a parent. And that's why we care about climate change, because of love. We love our family. We love the place where we live. We love our friends. We love our community. We love our country. We love our planet. And we love ourselves. And so often ourselves gets left off that list, doesn't it? So I schedule time, even though my email inbox is overflowing and I have this to-do list that just did not get done, which of course includes laundry too, as well as all the work stuff. I schedule time. And for me personally, spending time outside is where I recharge. Right. Sometimes with my family, sometimes by myself, but just being outside. I love water. I love paddleboarding. I love the snow. And I also love making things. I knit a lot. So I love knitting outside too. I knit, and I do love cooking for my family too. And so like on the weekends, that's why I really take the time to cook, because I love making something tangible that you can actually see the results of. And I make time for that because that's what restores me. That's what recharges me. And that's what enables me when Monday rolls around to go even harder, because I've had that time to love yourself and love your family as well as everyone else in this world.
Fabulous. I can't think of a better way to end this interview, as much as I hate to do it. I want to thank you again, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Here's the book. Make sure you get it and read it cover to cover. Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and healing in a divided world. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.